ever included lots and lots of corporate greed, which ruined the whole trilogy. Not the whole trilogy, but the ending, which kind of ruins it. You know, it went from being Game of Thrones level to, I mean, Lord of the Rings level to Game of Thrones level. So that's not amazing because Game of Thrones is great from seasons 1 through 7, and then season 8 is terrible. Same premise with Mass Effect. Of course, corporate greed has gotten worse in the past year, ever really since COVID. But Mass Effect 3 was released in 2011, and it was kind of the beginning of it all. See, EA acquired Mass Effect in 2010. And the past two games being a success, you'd think that Mass Effect 3 was going to be one too. Indeed, it was a commercial success, but ratings-wise was not. And it was considered one of the worst games in the whole trilogy. And that's obviously a problem when it should be the highest tech. It should be the one that you work the hardest on because it's the ending, it's the finish line. You want to finish strong, and they didn't. I mean, the climax of Mass Effect 2 was very strong, and then Mass Effect 3 came out, and usually you want the second one to kind of be a rising action for 3 to be the climax and falling action. However, that was not how it ended up being. And that's not just me that says that. That is storytelling 101. The middle of the thing, the middle of the end should be the climax. The rising action should build up to this amazingness. Look at Avengers, with Avengers 1, 2, 3, and 4. When was the climax in that? Kind of at the end of Endgame instead of the beginning or Age of Ultron. Yeah. So that's just saying that Mass Effect had greed. So now I want to kind of show you. See, Mass Effect, throughout its whole thing, the trilogy made about $150 million. However, they only spent about $95 to $120 million. So profited a large margin. However, the problem truthfully lies in is that when EA acquired it, Mass Effect 1 and 2 took 3.5 years, roughly. And Mass Effect 3 took 2 years. That's a 500-day difference. That's a lot. Not only that, but the deadlines, the budgeting goals, all of this was taken weirdly for some reason. For some reason, instead of being as great as it was, it ended up being pushed aside for some reason. And I can't to this day, even with all the research that I've done on this game, figure out why this illustrious game was kind of just mid. See, as a consumer, I can't fathom why a game would choose to deliberately make everyone's lives miserable while making the game with budgets and all of this. And they marketed it crazy. So why was the game terrible? Because billionaires wanted their money, but they didn't want to spend the money. They wanted it as soon as possible. They didn't have the patience to wait there and wait for a game to come out and get the money for better ratings. The consumer would love them more if they just did that. However, in Mass Effect 3 and Mass Effect Andromeda, for some reason they pushed for microtransactions and pre-orders, and of course, the big thing being microtransactions, obviously, but they pushed for it to come out earlier than it needed to be. See, they cut a lot of stuff, and because of the massive leak of the game, for some reason, they decided to rewrite and develop a whole new ending in 5 months, which, for a game that's whole thing is choosing, doesn't really give a whole lot of options. However, EA still decided to market this ending as this great ending to a great trilogy, which it ended up being very underwhelming, and I think that honestly pushed for fans to not like it even more, because replaying the game, wasn't truthfully that bad. However, first playing the game and seeing the hype for the ending was not amazing. The schedule took try and release the game by March 2012 ended up making the game worse. So, this is kind of what I want to get at, is the fact that I'm glad that GTA 6 is at least trying to make their game good. They're at least trying, and I can appreciate the fact that a company is letting the developers get time to release a steady, amazing game, which they weren't able to do with CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk, which ended up being a good game after all the bugs were fixed, and same for EA and Jedi Survivor. But I cannot say the same for Mass Effect 3. The damage was done, and EA effectively ruined a trilogy that was bound to be amazing. They had to just release an alright ending, an alright conclusion. Instead, they rushed it, and the developers, who are very talented, couldn't really help that. They created a DLC, and it ended up being more about maximizing the revenue that the game could have instead of being a story-driven, amazing DLC, which is a problem for anyone who's watching and playing a great game. That's a huge, gigantic problem. And like I said, when you really are pushing and wanting a game and saying, this game pushes the boundaries, and the conclusion is pushing the boundaries, everything is just so amazing, and this will be the greatest game, and then it releases and it's just slop because you rushed it so heavily, that's underwhelming for the consumer, and ultimately I think that damaged EA for a very, very, very long time. Eventually they made Anthem, which damaged it even worse. Ultimately, the crunch ended up of Mass Effect 3 hurting the developers more than it even hurt us, because they were having to spend 12 hours, 13-hour workdays, and not really getting paid a whole lot to make a game that ended up not being well received. And so I think that we cannot really blame the developers. They had a due date, and they were going to get fired if they didn't reach that due date. They need to get paid. They need money. Because, you know, everything requires a whole ton of money now. And even back in 2011, it required a lot of money. So they had to feed families, and I hate for the people that had to crunch so heavily just to be able to pay the bills. But what's even worse is we as consumers hated on a game and targeted some of that hate towards the developers that really don't deserve it, or the writers that really don't deserve it, and that, I think, could have caused a huge game developer strike. Luckily it didn't, and we just had the writer strike in 2023. Luckily, I think that's really the best we could have gotten from that situation. However, this significant crunch enabled several years of huge crunch. It happened with some of your favorite games and mine. I mean, the only ones that really don't have significant crunch time are, of course, indie games. But games released by AAA people ended up being to where you have huge, gigantic crunch in it. Games like Red Dead had massive crunch. Nakey Jakey covered it in his video, and I highly suggest you watch his video because he's a lot better at explaining this than I am. But, I mean, when a developer has to spend so much time and effort, and they're not able to spend that time and effort because they just have to get the game out, and you focus on getting it out instead of making it great, that hurts. And, you know, I'm sure that anyone can relate to such a topic. I mean, even in the second game, the game mechanics were amazing, but for some reason Mass Effect 3's game mechanics were janky, distorted at times. I mean, just so strange for a game that is so great at covering this type of thing all the time. So what can we do? First of all, let's not leak games or spoil them, because that's kind of terrible. But another thing that we should do when we're looking at all of this is let's not don't pre-order, because pre-ordering has not worked out well so far, and it just, companies get a bunch of money if you just buy the game ahead of time, and several have user agreements where you don't get to refund the game, Ubisoft and EA. So, yeah, and Activision, obviously, too. All of three of those are terrible. They all are on Xbox Game Pass, and Xbox is also even worse because they just constantly raise the prices. Like with a $20 game going to $20 Game Pass going to $30 Game Pass because they added Fortnite Crew to it. And, now the Ultimate requires that because, more money, better. They like seeing the stock go up. The stock line go up equals success. But that's not true. You'd think that you'd want your customers to really enjoy a game, but when your customers hate it, I just can't expect companies to realize that anymore. And all faith that I have has been lost in companies like this. And I think that's the same way for a lot of people. And I hate that for people who truly do work hard on what they release, like game developers, writers, even actors. They all work hard and they are very talented. And I just hope that none of this is going to end up being in any way, shape, or form bad, because I think that if anyone deserves it, gaming does. And gaming has been the best medium for a while, and I hope that stays the same, but I don't know if it is going to. So I want to ultimately say that even in a beloved universe where Mass Effect has been so amazing, it has its flaws, and the biggest flaw of all being billionaires yet again, because they don't have to atone for their actions, but instead we and the people who work for them do. So I don't know what to do. Comment if you do know what to do, and if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and I'll be back later. Peace and love. Treat everyone with kindness. Mood up. Mass Effect is what I was covering, of course, and yes, it had significant stuff, but it happens to several different industries all the time, especially with, anything with any sort of narrative depth or game mechanics. It hurts the people that are having to crunch because the writers have to can't spend the time they want to writing, they just have to get it out. So when you're releasing something, which we are lucky that Red Dead Redemption ended up being as great as it was because they had such huge crunch, and then you got one of the best narratives ever released. Mass Effect isn't as fortunate, though. Even with Mass Effect 1 and 2 being commercial successes and honestly great games with great narratives, Mass Effect 3 fumbled that. And as people, we can see that. And that's a huge problem because I personally love Mass Effect, and if you're watching this video, you probably also love Mass Effect. They also tried to make a single-player story that was amazing into a multiplayer game mode, which doesn't make any sense because you're having to spend more money on that. But we're hoping for a lot of people to want to play it. I mean, Halo was having these multiplayer game modes, and Halo had this commercial success that EA and BioWare were trying to compete with. And when you're trying to release a game like Halo, 304 did great with that, but this did awful with it. I mean, when you're trying to release a game and then you end up just constant, I don't even know what to say about this because I've never had to experience game developer crunch, and I've never had to have that stress, and my sympathy goes out to anyone who's had to go through this. I know that there's harder things in the world right now, but it's still pretty terrible, even as a consumer, to think about